You might note in the order of service that that piece of music was commissioned by us, and the composer was here this morning. She had to go to another concert, but was with us this morning. And Mark Sumner was supposed to be with us too, although thank you so much, Bill, for leading us. That was beautiful in choir. Mark had a COVID exposure, so we thought it better for him not to be singing and exposing all our beloved choir members to it. But that music is perfect for this morning on so many levels. This week, you might not know it from looking at the sanctuary right now, although you may have noticed some pieces in the gallery that are telltale signs. Our church was filled for multiple days, as it will be again, with people wearing talit and kippur and the sounds of Hebrew prayers and the cantor's voice. Today, those days like today here, there was the sound of the shofar to open and to close, so thank you, Bill Klingelhofer, for that. The wake-up call that the shofar is to a new year, to so much we're supposed to pay attention to in this time. Celebrated as it is in Jewish circles with challah and apples dipped in honey as a way to invite in not just a new year, but a sweet one. And perhaps every year that this tradition has been honored, like this year, the world has had some bitterness playing out. And perhaps every year, all the words of aspiration and promise were sung and spoken in unison against a backdrop of a world where sweetness was in jeopardy. And how does that shape our welcoming of a new year? Well, we all know hope is not a strategy. It's a choice. I would say it's some days a faith commitment, and one whose only meaningful measure of our commitment is how it shows up in actions, in our behavior, in leaning into real changes that become co-creators of the reality we aspire to see incarnate in our world. So it feels, and I'm sure not accidental, because rich religious traditions develop and deepen over time, and so perfectly appropriate that with the New Year's celebration of Judaism, there also begins a time of reflection and an invitation to personal commitment to change. It is said in Judaism that on Rosh Hashanah, the actions of our past year are written into the book of life, and that includes our sins of omission and commission, our hurtful errors, all the small and large betrayals of our best selves that we have been party to, and they're written into the book of life, and that would be a really depressing way to face a new year, except that we have until the days of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement as it's known, to try and clean up some of our mess, because on that day, the book of life will be irreparably closed. The record sealed for this year. So we have to get busy. There are these 9 days of the days of awe, as they're called, when you and I can cleanse our conscience and our legacy and turn, there's that beautiful word, teshuvah, turn so that we walk in a new direction into the new year, so that we reorient our lives however we feel we need to live more successfully, better aimed, better equipped, we hope, in heart, in willpower, to make the hopes that we have more possible than before the book of life is closed. This year, ultimately, for all times for us. Atonement, as I understand it, has always been in Judaism not about making it right with others first, Reconciliation with God, it was taught, was what would happen when we made it right with fellow human beings in our relationships. And I like to think also, I think it has to be so, that getting things right with other people, as we all have experienced, almost always means first getting things right in and with ourselves. I don't actually see how you can do one with the other. First, to do this work of writing things and setting a new course, we get clear, the way Daniel described in his reflection, get clear about what we think and what we believe and feel is right for us, and even what is right writ large that inspires and informs our choices. And all of that can be incredibly confusing and conflicted for any number of reasons, which, Daniel, thank you, you also helped point us toward, some of them at least. Because what the world tells us we should think and believe sometimes is confusing and not right with what we seem to feel and know somewhere deep inside, but that can get confusing because our unresolved personal issues can show up and muddy the waters and makes it hard for us to know, because often of our failure to clarify certain fundamental principles, grounding principles about what we believe and know to be true and will anchor our lives in, that will inform all the decisions to follow. All of it adds up to some of the confusion of knowing what to choose or how our choices stack up as we look back and review them. Somewhere in the getting things right between us is the getting things right with ourselves. And somewhere in all of it is the necessity to connect with the deepest part of ourselves and our best selves and what is a sacred knowing in us, however you describe that, by whatever philosophical or theological language, this larger knowing and connection and reconciliation to the best selves. And all of that, I think, has to come back to the practice that we're talking about this month of deep listening. So the story of the cricket and the coins by Ilhamuddin Nukman that Laura told today, this lesson that's for kids, but like the best stories, isn't just for kids. This villager who goes to visit a friend in the city and he hears the cricket somewhere chirping and no one else hears it above the din of the horns and the noises of the street, but the villager follows it, finding the ivy, parting the leaves, and there, in fact, is a cricket singing its song loudly. And when the friend, as you remember, compliments the villager's fine hearing, so sharp that he could hear the cricket, the villager takes some coins from his pocket and drops them on the pavement, and when they land, the heads turn in response on the street around him, and the villager makes his point. Though the tinkling of the coins was no louder than the chirping of the cricket, we all hear the things we are accustomed to paying attention to. You might say the things we choose to pay attention to. Frederick Buechner, the American author and Presbyterian minister, using theological language that was his, appropriate for him, and you can translate it as we all need to, talks about seeing God or hearing God speaking through everything, always, which raises the question for us, why don't we hear all that more often? Or how do we hear it more often? How do you and I, with everything we have to balance and juggle in our lives, how do we train ourselves to hear what is most important, speaking to us from the world and from deep inside? Daniel offered a sense of some of what helps him Maybe some of it rings true for some of you. Time to slow down, time apart, especially when in the midst of a big decision, especially when feelings are strong and even contradictory. Time apart to slow down. Journaling, for him, it was biking. I think often for many of us, it's some practice that pulls us back into our body. That beautiful word, member, that means the pieces of our body remembering, reconnecting to our bodies and what they also have to tell us about what we're feeling and knowing. Maybe what he had, this ability to be someplace unfettered, not reminded by who he had chosen to be in the past, but with space to listen for who he was being asked to choose going forward. Frederick Buechner says the hearing, though, can happen anywhere, that we don't need to go far away or to any special place to hear what we need to hear. What we do need, he says, remember, it speaks even in the walk from the house to the garage that you have walked 10,000 times before. And I think that's true, too. It can be, we all know moments when we have an unsuspecting insight or clarification dropped on us in the midst of routine and familiar surroundings and even busyness. In fact, actually, I remember once I went to walk my dog in the morning, like I did every morning, and I was crossing the street, and I was filled in my head with the to-do list of the day that I was already sort of streaming through, and so not really paying attention to a lot, except that in the crosswalk, and because red lights are only suggestions in San Francisco, in the crosswalk, there was this car racing, even though the light was already red, racing up in from the simple block before to the crosswalk. And I was so jerked out of my own reality that I jumped back appropriately to the midway of the street of Guerrero and yanked my poor mini poodle. Unfortunately, we started putting her in body things after that, because that was not a good moment for her or me. And the person did, in fact, slam on the brakes at the red light, which was red when they started from the previous block. And it hit me in that moment as I said to my God, you're racing to the red light? And then it hit me. What a great metaphor it was, myself included, right? That senseless hurry that served no purpose at all, just caught in the rush of it all, addicted to it sometimes even, it seems like, and the danger, the secondary effects, and the uselessness of living that way. This metaphor and this caution. Right in the middle of a day walking the dog. We can hear wisdom and invitations to reorient our lives. We can hear and find clarity anywhere. What seems to be important, though, is that, like the villager taught his friend, we increasingly train ourselves to listen for all of that. Because, like every skill, we get better at it the more we practice. And the consequences of this one are pretty important to us, that listening, what it does for us. Because the fact is that our lives need a lot of small course corrects, right? I mean, sometimes we get the big ones. Sometimes we do this 180-degree pivot. We get sober, or we go for marriage counseling, or we quit one job, and we change professions because we know we're miserable or called to do something else. But more often, I think you and I are more like the plane that is on autopilot, which I have heard is off course 95% of the time. But just by a little, and so constantly course correcting, so it gets to the destination it wants to get to. And those little adjustments are what deep listening makes possible daily for us if we find the ways for us that work to do it. Just little adjustments. I need to be kinder today to my spouse. I need to be less defensive at work. I need to be more generous with the resources I have. I need to be more open to laughter. I need to take better care of my body. I need to prioritize friendship. And all of that will show up in these daily choices that are just different enough to get our lives back on course. That beautiful word, teshuvah, turning. So we stay on course. Because course correcting once a year, if that's what we do, if we even do that, means we may have a lot of work to do, erasing things or correcting things in the book of life, if we can even do it at that point, and skip a year, and oh my goodness, people, we may end up in Istanbul, though we meant to be in Australia, and we're talking about our lives. So, we all know also, I think this is an important moment and an appropriate moment to name what we all see, right? Which is that we also all know, not just in our lives, but we know in the world what it looks like when things have gone drastically off course. I mean, we know in a lot of ways. But this week in particular, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's aware of the fact that we're stepping into the 1-year anniversary of the horrific events of October 7th and the days after, and the violence in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank and now Lebanon and Iran and all over the region, and that we're stepping into a year of what? Hatred and demonization and violence and dehumanization and so much else can do. And we will, in the weeks ahead, as a nation and as individuals in our own way, commemorate people and places with scars that will never fully heal, and all of it started a year ago. And I don't know enough about the politics or the long history of relationships and failures of a moral imagination in all the places that they happened, or the political mistakes and the arrogance and the ignorance that contributed to all of it. I don't. But I do know as a religious person that when evil is done, always, it is done by individuals, or authorized by individuals, who lose touch with some deep wisdom that we all have access to, that knows a better way, even if the choice would have been hard, especially when we are brokenhearted and angry and afraid. And there have been lots of those choices. People who forgot that if you kill and starve and rape in the name of a faith, you have betrayed everything worthy of that faith and of any faith that is worthy of you. Who forgot that we will be judged by how we treated the vulnerable, and especially by how we treated the children. That we must choose our enemies carefully, as my minister growing up used to say, choose our enemies carefully, for we will become like them. Who forgot that old Yiddish phrase, and maybe there's one in Arabic too, that reminds us that when you go out for revenge, you have to dig 2 graves. Evil that happens when we forget what it means to listen deeply and to live into what we hear when we do, and the dangers of getting unanchored from that place in our own lives intimately and in all we have to own together, because we do own it all. So each year, there is this ritual time in Judaism, so gorgeous, so thoughtful, when it asks its people to reflect on what's written in the book of life, what they wrote in the book of life, what each of us did, and to pray and to shed worldly things and to get back as one in relationship and connection to each other and to ourselves, and to clean up our mess and to turn as we needed to by a degree, by 180 degrees while we can, for our own sake and for the world's sake, and because of everything we hold dear and sacred, to listen. Judith Stoddard's daughter, Susanna, Judith, I hope I have your permission to share this, lived in Asheville for more than 20 years and was affected by the hurricane, and sent a lengthy account of what happened. And the way she signed her email and the last words of her account feels so relevant to this Sunday's service, and so I close sharing them. She writes, Shana Tova, in hopes that out of all the sadness and hurt of this last year, for all those who have suffered and are suffering, a good new year may arise. May we make it so. May it be so. Amen.